All right, Wagwan Generals. You'll notice that there's no Ciaran here right now. Don't worry, he'll be here shortly. So we just got finished filming the later part of this video, which is our interview with Raph, one of the judges in Toronto, judge internationally as well. We basically just picked his brain completely on judging questions that you guys might have, stuff like that. It ended up being like a super duper interesting conversation. Initially, it was planned to be like about half an hour. It ended up being close to an hour. So there's a lot of good info in there, and I honestly learned a lot. So that was what we were doing. But unfortunately, the clock has ticked 5, and whilst I am off of work, about to go to the Raptors game in about 10 minutes, Ciaran had to leave for an undisclosed activity. So I'm by myself right now, and so I actually used to do a podcast by myself because y'all know I can ramble. I used to talk sports all the time by myself. So this isn't too weird for me, but when Ciaran gets back and when I pass this over to him, he's going to do the Birmingham Regionals kind of breakdown, and Rio as well happened this weekend. So he's going to break both of those down going into San Antonio this weekend. I personally am just here to intro, as I don't want to recap those tournaments and then have Ciaran do it all over again after. But if you're here, appreciate you. I'm going to hand it over to Ciaran right now.
Thanks, Aneil. Yeah, like you said, our schedules just didn't align that well this week, so we have to do async for this part of the episode. As Aneil was finishing work, I was actually starting work. I had a lot of coaching, so I couldn't stay on after our call with Raph, which was a really great conversation, kind of sparked by a tweet by Benji this week. So you guys can watch that later. So I'm by myself to break down what happened at the regionals. Honestly, it's like kind of interesting, but like not that exciting at the same time. Like you've probably noticed in the past couple weeks of episodes, we haven't been talking that much about the meta because we've had this format for such a long time. But there were some really interesting results. I think the main thing you guys probably want to hear about is my thoughts on Palkia. It got 3 top 8 slots in Birmingham, and it won in Rio. So I'll start with the Birmingham top 8. So we got second, top 4, top 8. So Palkia just randomly did well, and I still can't really wrap my head around why it did this well. Its play rate was very, very low. If you look at day 2, it wasn't that high. It was only Where is it here? It was only 3%, 11 people. So to have 3 out of 11 people convert into day 2 or into top 8 is like incredible. So I think on paper the deck probably has a good Regidrago matchup. When you go first, like it's pretty easy with Palkia, or even Trapaga to knock out any of the 2-prize Pokemon. You have Noctowl to ensure that you're going to get that Prime Catcher or that boss to get 2 prizes, and then once you take 2, you're just going to out-prize trade them. It's really hard to whiff, especially with this build that included the Bibarel. And when you go second, like you have the potential to like make like a 1-prize board, or like have Palkia on the bench and like force Drago to Prime Catcher, like flip Tails and Swing Fiend if they want to take 2 prizes. The list also has a vacuum, which I like, so you can vacuum your own area 0 if you need to heal, if your opponent tries to go for like a spread strategy. But I'm not sure how good this deck actually is. I tried it a little bit this week, and it's pretty linear. It just kind of feels like it is a mid-range deck, like it's a little bit of aggro. It's like, it reminds me a bit of Regidrago, where like you kind of have a stage 1, or I guess a V-Star evolution, and then you kind of just have the Noctowl to support inside the Ogre Pawns, and then instead of having like the flexibility in terms of attackers, you just have the flexibility in terms of items. So it's a deck that wants to go 2-2-2. My only problem with it is it's a bit linear. You really only attack with Palkia and Trapagos, and then sometimes Radiant Greninja, and it's the evolution decks. But I do think if the evolution decks can stabilize, it's kind of difficult. So this deck, probably better than any deck, can play the Prime Catcher Clone combo. So like against Charizard, Gardevoir, whatever, you can take stuff out, and then you kind of hope that they kind of can't stabilize from there, reset their board. But I do think if a Charizard can, like recover from that, or they play Thornton or whatever, they can win. So I actually didn't watch the finals. I'm gonna guess something like that kind of happened. And yeah, we had Charizard win again, which is, I guess, surprising considering Drago is still the most popular deck. But this list is pretty standard aside from the Pokestop. So we've been seeing a lot of Charizard playing Jamming Tower and or Collapse Stadium. So this build has the Pokestop. And I did see the clip on Twitter of the guy ripping double rare candy, which was hilarious. And I actually thought about it more. I actually think Pokestop's pretty good in this deck, especially if you play Palpad. Because a lot of the times, like to make a strong turn, you need Rare Candy, Counter Catcher, and Ultra Ball. And you play like basically 10 copies of those cards if I add them all together. And there's not really anything where it's like a disaster for you to mill. Charizard also just thins the flyers out of the deck. So then like your deck gets like a smaller concentration of non-item cards. And then this build plays the Palpad, so if you do get unlucky and you mill Briar, for example, or like Boss, or I don't know, whatever you need, you can just Palpad them back. So you're kind of insulated from bad discards. So it'll be interesting to see if Pokestop starts becoming adopted in Charizard. But I know like this player has gotten first and then second in back-to-back regionals with the Pokestop, I think. He played 2 at Stuttgart and went down to 1 this time, but yeah, super interesting build. Cool. Brent got top 8 with Drago. It looks cookie cutter. The one thing I want to point out is Brent did play Counter Catcher and he played 3 Iono. So this is definitely a more defensive or like play from behind version of Drago. I'm sure Brent was opting to go blind second into a lot of matchups. He went with 3 Iono over 3 Research. So I think just valuing that comeback potential. Because a lot of turns like going like Iono plus Prime Catcher or Iono Counter Catcher super strong. So you just have now like 2 gusting cards that like aren't boss. And then like you have like if you go second, like you obviously clap on and you hope your opponent takes 1 prize and you use the Counter Catcher to get yourself the 2 prizes first. Or even if you take 2 prizes without Counter Catcher and your opponent starts going like 2 prizes back and forth trade, you'll always be down by 1. So Counter Catcher can be live all the time. So really interesting inclusion. Sad to see Temple of Sinnoh in here. Don't play this card, please, guys. But otherwise, pretty standard list. There's another Drago that Ruin made top 8 as well. This list was just like extremely standard. Not much to comment on this one. Cool. The other thing I want to talk about is Tarapagos. Maybe a bit of a bounce back this weekend. Really good conversion to day 2. I think it became like the 3rd most popular deck or something, or 4th most popular deck in day 2, or it was tied for 3rd. After being like only 4% day 1. We had Daniel made top 8 with the Boufflant build. I think this is more, or this is closer to what we've been seeing. Trapagos. The Boufflants do give it, in my opinion, a strong Rizzy Drago matchup. You know, just having the ability to like block Ciaran from like knocking out all your guys. Giratina can't knock out Trapagos. And this still plays the 4/4 Noctowl, which I love. The kind of crazy thing about Trapagos is we come all the way around to like we're even seeing like 1/1 Duskull now, Dusknoir. And it's becoming like, it's still an important part of the deck, but it's less integral. I feel like you probably want to play 2 Duskull just so you have more Poffin targets, and then one doesn't just get sniped off your bench. But the deck plays Thornton. And there's a heavy ball in here, so you're not too worried about prizing it. You're only really worried about prizing the Dusknoir, which that happens kind of unlucky. But what I'm interested to see is if people play this list or people adopt Tord's list. So obviously, like Tord is Tord. So people probably are hyped about his list. And he played a really interesting build. He went without the Boufflants. This is a more traditional Trapagos build. And he played 1/1 Drago V-Star. You can see he didn't play a lot of recovery cards. Like he only played 1 Stretcher. He doesn't play Palpad. So I guess his thought process is using the Reggie Drago. One thing I like is the Latios. I think Latios is a nice inclusion. A lot of times like switch like is just annoying to have to Noctowl for. So just having the option Nest Ball or Ultra Ball for like your switching effect when you don't start with Trapagos, I think is great. Also gives you like an easy way to retreat turn 1 if you start with a 2 prize and you want to retreat to a 1 prizer. So yeah, pretty cool list from Tord. I'd like to probably see a second Stretcher, but I'm sure Tord's put like tons of hours into this deck. So he played 1/1 Duskull. I don't know why, but might be a reason. Other than that, the top 8 and anything exciting. There's another Charizard. I think this was pretty standard when I looked. Yeah, there's Pokemon League headquarters. I mean, a little different, but there's like a Snorlax in top 16. One thing that was interesting when I was looking at Snorlaxes is a lot of them are like going to the build without Rotom. So Rotom build did end up getting top 16. So if you like playing the Rotom build, it's still obviously very strong. And then Arc Galadon had a decent, actually pretty good conversion today too, like tied for 3rd most popular. And I was looking at a lot of the list, and like so a lot of them were playing Banette, which I thought was really interesting. So one thing I have seen when you play Arc Galadon is like you're kind of susceptible to Iono at the end of the game. If you can set up Banette, you can basically just guarantee you have a boss, research if you need it, whatever. But one thing I thought Banette might be strong with is like making it easier to get Thornton on the turn you want to make Dialga. But this list actually doesn't even play Dialga. It literally just focuses on Arc Galadon. as like a tank, and then like using like Pokemon Catcher to like aggressively go after like the 2-price Pokemon without a lot of health, so stuff like Minion, Squawk, Ogerpon. So this is definitely a really unique take on the deck. And he wasn't the only player who played a Banette line. When I was looking earlier, I think there's some other players. I don't know if Bert did. Yeah, Bert was playing like the 1/1 Banette line, and he played more traditional with the Alga line. Yeah, this is how I was kind of envisioning when I heard people playing Banette. Like, you kind of use it as like a Thornton enabler. So this is more traditional, which was interesting. Did Ethan play this? No, Ethan played a more traditional. Who was it I was looking at? I think Stefan played the Banette as well. Yeah, Stefan played this build that also got top 16. So yeah, a lot of great players are on this Banette in our Galadon, and I honestly didn't really hear that many whispers of it leading up to the tournament. So it'll be very interesting to see if this gets adopted going forward. Yeah, other than that, nothing too exciting. I mean, Sander has his latest creation. He has like, I don't even know what's going on here. Milotic, I had to read what this did. Blocks Turo and Penny. The Black Curum to like kind of like paralyze Drago. This Tauros is interesting. I didn't even know what this did. You can put 2 energy from your opponent's stage 2 into their hand. I guess against Charizard or something, you like just send the energy back, try and get them stuck. There's like a picnic basket to heal from spread. So lots of cool stuff going on here. It's a classic Sander build, so great to see him. I know he's taking kind of like a break for a while, so great to see him back at tournaments and doing well with his creations. Yeah, other than that, nothing too exciting I wanted to go over. And then Rio was won by Palkia. So by Fabrizio, a great player. I think this is his second regional win. Yeah, second regional win. So his build is a little different than the one I was looking at in Birmingham. He's playing like Ditto, actually, transformative start instead of like third Fan Rotom, which I think is fine. Kind of interesting, I guess. Like, you get this active turn 1, maybe like it's another out to getting Palkia, because from playing, like, sometimes you whiff Palkia turn 1. It's really important you go first. A lot more disruption options in here. Like, there's a Judge, for example. That's a nice. I think turn 2, like, his idea is kind of like you go Palkia for like a big damage on something, and then you just like Judge to kind of hope your opponent bricks, and then you kind of just sweep them from there. So I thought that was a really interesting inclusion. Otherwise, the deck is pretty similar. Very cringe that 2 Iron Thorns made top 8. I mean, I'm not really going to go over these. Iron Thorns is cringe. And then we had an Ancient Box, actually got 9th. I think this was ASIM cut. So we've seen Ancient Box pop up here and then. Got second in the Champions League in Japan. And it's like been hanging around like the top 16s, like fighting for top 8 at the TPCI region. So yeah, this is a more traditional one. I know for a while like, people are throwing like Roaring Moon and stuff in there. This really just plays the Pekron as a tech, I guess, for Snorlax. And still playing like a 2-2 split of Caridon and Great Tusk. I mean, Great Tusk just to mill, which is like pretty solid in the late game. And then Caridon is actually a really good attacker to take out stuff like Pheasantipity, and then if you play against like Maridon or something. So kind of cool to see that one pop back up. And then when I looked at the day 2 here, our Galadon did less well in Rio. It still did well, like 6.6% of day 2. I think people were kind of expecting a number like this for the deck for its like day 1 meta share. So to see it carry over to day 2, I think shows that the deck is for real. Cloth had 7.6%. So in day 2, so definitely more popular over in Brazil. And Lugia also had a really good tournament at 8%. So, oh, actually, one thing I did want to talk about was the Lugia that lost in ASIM in Birmingham. This was very interesting. They played Roseanne's backup instead of 16th energy. I'm not a huge fan of this. I just feel like it's, do you really have time to Roseanne's backup? And normally, like, you want a Roseanne's backup, like the Legacy back, if people like Enhanced Hammer or something, and like that's just not really a popular card in Standard right now. And there was also a Klefki. I think I've given my thoughts before on why I don't like Klefki. It still doesn't make your Iron Thorns matchups like 50-50, like it's still unfavored. Klefki actually kind of griefs you if you start with it as well. It blocks Squawk and Luminion, so if you want to play a Thorns counter, just play Fluttermane, because it doesn't grief you, and if you play against like Lost Box or something, it actually helps out. Also, we need to be playing for Research. Play more consistency, so. But I guess it is kind of cool to see Roseanne's back up again. I haven't seen that card success in a long time, so. That's Ciaran's meta update. Heading into San Antonio this weekend, I think the big question will just be how much of the meta does Palkia become? I mean, yeah, like it wasn't even on the graphic day 2 in like the top 12 most played decks. I will say, like, Palkia is a deck that a lot of people played in the past, but there's only a week between tournaments, so, like, I don't know how many people can, like, see a deck do well, pick it up, and then decide to run it. People have probably been working on their decks for a while. So if I had to give you guys a guess, I'd probably guess, like, 3 to 4% for Palkia. It will probably make, like, the best of the rest graphic, but I don't think it'll be one of the main decks on the graphic. So. And I think the other thing, too, is our Galadon, I think, is going to stay as a popular deck. It'll probably be, like, 6 to 7%. And then we'll just see if people start picking up the Bennett build or not. So other than that, I don't expect much to change. Drago, Charizard, Raging Bolt should probably still be the 3 most popular decks. Lugia might go up a little bit. But yeah, everything else should probably stay around the same. So yeah. Like a little weird to just have me talking at this part of the episode. But yeah, next we were going to talk with Raph. He's like Neil said, he's like a judge in Toronto. He's actually from Brazil. And I kind of just wanted to get his thoughts on how to approach things as a judge, because Benji had that really interesting scenario that happened that you guys will see. And I'm not a judge, so just having like a source that we can kind of reference was a really good discussion. So yeah, let me know what you guys are thinking of playing to San Antonio. And otherwise, just enjoy that segment with Raph.
All right, and y'all made it to the very special segment we have here with Mr. Raph. Raph's looking outside right now. He wishes he was in Brazil. He does not wish he was in Toronto right now. Like negative whatever the hell it is outside. It's quite cold. Raph, how you doing, man? Other than the cold, how are you doing today, this week? Are you judging soon? Like, what's going on in the life of Raph right now?
I'm great, man. Thank you for asking. Yeah, it's too cold for my Brazilian blood. It is running very icy in my veins right now. Yeah, I'm trying to do as many cups and challenges as I can. You know, school is back, so I teach design, so colleges are back, so it's getting harder and harder to travel. Hopefully, I'll be in Vancouver. Unfortunately, no UIC for me this year. So my plan this year is Vancouver, Atlanta, Utrecht, Milwaukee, and then NAIC and Worlds. So let's see how that goes.
Sick. That's awesome. So for all you guys who don't know, Raph is a local legend around here in the Torontonian parts. We all love Raph. Very like for some reason, I don't know, everyone knows Raph. I don't know why, because you only do like the tier 3 cups.
Yeah,
like
yeah.
2 or 3 versions. Yeah. I don't know.
Yeah.
Man, you must make a lasting impression because everyone knows Raph.
Yeah.
So in the
hopefully
light,
a good one.
Yeah. Legally, I have to say it's a good one, but I don't know, man. Just kidding. So yeah, in the light of a bunch of random stuff that happened this weekend, Ciaran tagged a very long judge post and kind of sent it to me and said, "Hey, what do you think of this?" So Ciaran, I'll let you kind of segue into what we're doing here, and obviously Raph can only say so much, so we will be careful with what we do.
Yeah, so I think Benji Fam, he had a post I think kind of like viral in the Pokemon Twitter space. And I thought instead of Aneil and I just giving you guys our uninformed opinions, we'd bring a judge to come on and kind of give us like a peek behind the curtain on like how stuff works or how a ruling like this would be made. So Raph's not allowed to comment directly on this ruling because that's just the rules. But he can like help us like understand like how you guys can protect yourself from like stuff like this happening, or how a judge would come to the conclusion for something like this. So I'll just go over it really quickly. I'll link the tweet below. It's a bunch of paragraphs, but basically Benji in his first round of Birmingham Regionals played against a cloth player. He claims, this is all from his point of view. We don't have anyone else's point of view. So he claims that his opponent said that they are going to attack and you are getting KO'd by poison. He says that he asked them, "Are you attacking?" And they said yes, and you are getting KO'd by poison. That wasn't a knockout, so Benji started putting the damage counters down, and his opponent then claimed that, "Wait, I didn't attack yet, I have to recalculate." So a judge got called. Obviously, these are the only two players who know what happened. So they both told the judges their stories. And then the judges said since the stories don't match, they have to choose a story that's most likely to occur. They said it's not likely a player would attack for not enough damage. So they said they were probably just calculating. And they ruled that the player could go back and redo their stuff and do the attack. So the head judge was involved in this, which I assume any ruling will happen for an appeal, which Raph can confirm later. And then later, Benji also said one of the judges told him that asking your opponent, "Are you attacking?" could be seen as rushing. I think that's a little ridiculous if that is true. But Benji said later in the match something similar happened, but there's a judge watching. So The thing that I think is most interesting that I kind of want to discuss is like the ethical part of it. Is like he said in hindsight, if he just let his opponent take the 2 prizes and then called the judge, the opponent gets the DPL. He could have guaranteed that his opponent confirmed an attack. But obviously, like that's cheating. Then if you on purpose let your opponent make a gameplay error. So that's at a high level kind of what happened. So before we kind of give our opinions after, Raph, I kind of want to hear like what goes into a judge's like thought process when there's like a he said she said situation where like no judge was present to kind of witness like what happened. Can you kind of like walk through how you guys determine what you would do?
All right. So I want to preface this by saying that these are my own personal opinions. This is not real. I don't represent the judge program on a broader level. I'm always, so once a professor, always a professor. You're always representing the program, but I don't speak for it. And so I'm not going to comment, like I said, I can't comment on the specific situation, right? And with situations that are he said and she said, it's very, very tough because it comes down to investigation, right? You need to look for clues to help you determine which story is closer to the truth. And once again, or to the actual, not the truth, but to the actual factual events. Because once you have so many people involved on a call, right? So you have, right now you have with most things that make their way to the Xverse or the Twitterverse, you have one side, right? So in those situations, you always have at least 3 different perspectives. You have player A, player B, and the judge. So we're only getting a very, very small portion of what actually happened. Personally, when it comes down to just asking a lot of questions. Ask a lot of questions. Make sure the stories are consistent. So if I ask you, if you call me to your table and you tell me the same story in 3 different versions every time that I ask you, that to me is strange, right? If you tell me the same story a bunch of times and the story remains the same, it means that your story is consistent, right? And that's when playing the game helps a ton. Sometimes the sequence of plays makes sense, and sometimes it doesn't, right? So sometimes the player says, "Oh, I was intending to do this instead of and not that," and all the actions that preceded that specific moment in the match tell me otherwise. So that's also kind of, so you just gotta kind of put everything together, right? And when a call takes very long, it usually means that higher and higher levels of judges are getting involved. So the longer a call takes, the more likely it is that you're getting very, very experienced judges to participate on the ruling, right? And as always, if you don't agree with the ruling, that's the beauty of the appeals, right? You should never be afraid to ask for an appeal. And we as judges should not take an appeal as a shot at our ability to judge, because the reality is that calls are very, very complicated, especially this type of calls, right? Because there's a lot of elements into it, and we work with a very, very tight time frame. You want to keep the event rolling. You don't want to take too long. So if you as a player, you feel like the decision is not what you would expect or what you've experienced in the past, I went to another event, and that changes as well from event to event. Similar situations can be ruled differently. That does happen. Just ask for an appeal.
Okay,
ask
so I guess
for an appeal, and we'll see right that gets you.
Cool. So I have a couple kind of like follow-up questions. So is something like experience taken into account? So like maybe like if you're a very experienced player, would a judge be like, okay, like they're less likely to like make a mistake like this? Like maybe like I'll just use myself as an example, I guess. But okay, like Ciaran, like he's played for a long time, like he normally does pretty well. Like he's probably more likely to like actually be calculating and think and like not be in the attack phase. But like maybe like someone who's like a newer player, it's more likely that like they would maybe mess up. Is that something judges take into consideration, or no? Do they treat every single person like the exact same? Because I have heard, like, you'd have to confirm this for me, but from judges that if a player is more experienced, like they'll look more like harshly in terms of like penalties sometimes. Like they should know better than like doing like drawing extra cards, stuff like that. So is experience ever taken into account for like something like this?
I mean, so once again, from my perspective, right? I think that if you have a player let's say, such as yourself, that has done really, really well in the past, and has, not in the past, not like you ever has been. You're a good player now.
He's washed.
So that tells me that you have a set of skills that, when you're playing, your play should match that skills. That does not insulate you from making mistakes, right? So I can't say, oh, wait, Ciaran, why would you double retreat? Are you trying to cheat? It can't be. There's a lot of things. Sometimes in a turn of Pokemon, you take 20 actions, and your first action might have been a retreat, and now your 20th action is you trying to retreat again. And I can't say that because you've never done this that you should be expected never to do it, right? So while I once again, when I'm analyzing these situations, I'm always trying to look at intent more than anything else, because that's the big thing that differentiates a gameplay error penalty from a cheating infraction, right? It's always the intent. If you look at the rule book for something to be considered cheating, for example, it needs to be a rules infraction, and there needs to be intent. If one of those things is not there, then it's not a cheating infraction. So to me, I'm always looking at intent. That's the most important thing when analyzing these calls, is that, was this on purpose or was this just a natural mistake? And that's why warnings are great, because if you see a pattern of behavior that's repeating itself for similar situations, then you have kind of something to build your case on top of.
Makes sense. So I just have a quick follow-up to that, Ciaran, if you don't mind.
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, awesome. First of all, I think you articulated that excellently, by the way. That was an excellent response. That was awesome. So I just have a question from the perspective of a judge, and this is something like I would just ask you normally if we were just hanging out or whatever, but I'll ask you on here so everyone can hear it. In terms of like being a judge, right? So Pokemon's a game where you can't really like script in a rule book all the infractions that might occur, right? It's not like playing football or playing basketball where you say, hey, this is a foul, this is a free throw, whatever. It's not normally that simple. There's like a billion things that could go wrong in a turn. In terms of being a judge, how much does experience kind of carry you in dealing with weird like situations over time, right? Like, do you find that a judge who's maybe been judging for 6 years is a lot better than a judge who's brand new, or like how does experience kind of play a factor into that?
I think it does play kind of a big factor. What happens is right now, if you want to be a judge, your main document to look at is the Tournament Rules Handbook, right? That's where, and I would highly recommend everyone that wants to play competitively to read it, because once you read it, you understand things much better, right? It's just like, would you play soccer without knowing that you can't touch the ball with your hands? No. Like, oh, what's offline? What's the I forget the name in English. The one that offside. Yes. What's an offside? Right. So what's an offside? So you need to know those things to be able to play the game correctly. And that goes just beyond understanding the cards and what the cards do. A ball rolls. Nest ball gets me a Pokemon and puts it in my bench, a basic Pokemon. But that's not enough to play the game, right? That's enough to do actions. And so I would highly recommend any player to familiarize themselves with the tournament rule book. It's a fantastic tool for that. But I agree with you. What ends up happening is that Pokemon is a game that has 20 plus years now. So there's so much in the knowledge base that is not represented just in one document. Right? Hopefully, nowadays, if I want to search up a ruling for a new card, I need to go into the Compendium, which is a tool that has rulings all the way back from Wizards of the Coast era. And I need to look for a ruling that looks similar to the ruling that I want to find now. So for me, as a new judge, I've been doing this for a couple of years now. I'm a relatively new professor. I don't know what Gengar Prime did. I don't even know what Gengar Prime is. So if I need to look up a ruling about Gengar Prime and how that interacts with a card that was just printed out in Japan, that makes it really tough on me. So it really requires an extra amount of basically education. You need to educate yourself. The more you educate yourself as a judge, and you learn these interactions, and you start seeing patterns, right? Oh, this was ruled like this for that card. This is kind of similar, but it's not the same. And then you can start growing your backlog of information that you can access at any point to make these rulings. Other games do have comprehensive rule books. Magic has a comprehensive rule book. Lorcana has a comprehensive rule book. And I'll say this, for Lorcana it's much easier because the game is brand new, so they don't have all that backlog of information.
Yeah, exactly.
No, so they're like, and they're making it as they go. As soon as they released it, in the first 2 months, they reviewed it like 4 times because players found loopholes. They were like, no, if you're saying this is what's going to happen, right? Magic, the comprehensive rulebook for Magic is a tome. It's just like gigantic, right? Hopefully in the future we'll have something like that, because while the compendium has all the information there, it's not easily accessible, or it's not so fast for me to access it. Let's say during a tournament, it'll take a long time for me to find anything, right? The other thing is we have the Professor University, which is an online repository of courses and videos, and that is amazing. It has great content for professors. So if you're a new professor or even a tournament organizer, and you want to learn a little bit more, just go there, and there's like certifications. It's a fantastic tool. But once again, it's hard to access during an event, right? You want to have something that's kind of in your fingertips. And that's what the Tournament Rules Handbook is this document that we can access, right?
Yeah, it makes sense.
Yeah, there are a lot of examples in the rulebook. If you look at penalties and gameplay error, what is a gameplay error minor? There's like 5 or 6 examples, and then what you can do is sometimes there's a very similar example in gameplay error major. And you're like, okay, so I know what the book defines as minor, the book defines as major. The problem is what falls in between these two, and that's when judgment calls and being a little bit more experienced comes into play. So trying to do regionals and bigger events is very, very important. Working with other judges that have been to these sort of events is also very important, because to be 100% honest, that's the best, fastest way to learn is from your peers.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. So I guess Raph, I have another kind of follow up on that, kind of. So we're kind of talking about a situation here that's very nuanced, and I think a lot of times stuff you were talking about intent, right? So it's very hard to determine intent, and a lot of situations are complex. So my question to you is how much of an advantage do you think it is if a judge is a strong player towards being a great judge? So I've been of the mindset to be a truly elite judge, I actually think you do have to be a pretty good player, because I think sometimes you'll have situations let's say we have a stalling situation, and you're trying to figure out if a player is stalling or not. You have to understand if it's actually a winnable situation based on the board for one side of the board. For me, if I saw a board and I saw someone's resources, I could probably tell if the game is winnable or not. So I guess my question kind of is how much do you think being a good player factors into being a good judge? And do you guys ever defer to some judges who are more experienced as players when it comes to these judgment calls on a situation? For example, if someone's stalling or not.
So I'm gonna do a Uno reverse.
Sure.
Would you expect a player, a referee that's at the finals of the World Cup to be able to play at the World Cup?
See, but I think that's not. I was actually thinking about that in my head, but I think that's not one. I don't think that's a 1-to-1 equivalent, because sports requires physical things, right? You can't dunk like LeBron no matter if you're just not born like him, right? But I think for something like Pokemon, or even a game like chess, maybe. I think everyone's on the even playing field when it comes to the physical attributes. So no, I don't expect a judge to be as good as Tord, but I do think there's something to be said. I'm sure most referees in professional sports, I'm sure they've played the sport growing up, or they love the sport. Otherwise they probably wouldn't be a referee, right? Or even
it's also different too. Yeah, it's also different too, because if you're a Pokemon player and you're the top 40 percentile of Pokemon player, you're still not making money. You're not doing a whole lot for yourself. Whereas to be a pro athlete, you have to be in the top 1%, right? So I think that range is kind of farther out with Pokemon too, right? I think you need to be, to Ciaran's point, an above average player, right? You don't need to be the best, but above.
No,
average.
I don't think you need to be the best. I agree with you. So I think that, and once again, if we think about above average, that bar is really low, because the average player is not fantastic, right? If you take the full scope, I'm not talking about the average regionals player. I'm talking about the average locals player or maybe the kitchen table player, right? And I don't. I'll break this down into two things. I don't think you need to be an amazing player to be a good judge, especially if you're not going to do premier events. So you can be, because there are other things that go into being and more broadly, a professor, right? A judge is one of the things you can do as a professor. You can be a tournament organizer. You can run a league very, very successfully, teaching the basics and getting kids to play the game. Amazing, right? You are perhaps your technical is not so strong, but your people skills make up for it. And I always think that well, professors, all professors, judges, whatever, we are providing a service in a way, right? And we are customer facing. Soft skills like de-escalation of conflicts, being able to explain things thoroughly, being able to uh, calmly walk players through scenarios. You know, I think all of these are harder to teach than the technical skills. I think the technical skills, with enough repetition, you can get them. These soft skills, they're very, very hard to teach for. And if you get any manager in any company, they should hire people with soft skills and teach them the hard skills, right? It's just how it goes. So I see the path of the professor in the same way. If you're gonna do high level events like regionals, internationals, worlds, I think it is very, very important for you to have strong uh, understanding of what the concepts are in a Pokemon game. Like it's important to understand prize mapping. It's important to understand, tempo. It's important to understand accrued advantage. It's important to understand comeback mechanics. Like, oh no, you are a Gardevoir, you were down 3 prizes, you can't win this game anymore. No, this is exactly where I want to be. This is my spot, right? This is what the deck is designed to do. It's important to understand these concepts. Is it as important to execute them as a high level player? I don't think it is, because to be honest, personally, I find Pokemon a very, very, very hard game. I find it extremely difficult. I, it's just, there's too many things going on. That's too many actions for me personally as a player. It just, it's always kind of boggles my mind when I see someone doing 15 actions and sequencing their turn perfectly to find the 16th card they need on the top of their deck. And I'm like, yes, and I'm rooting at home, right? I'm watching the streams and I'm rooting at home. I find that amazing. Uh, because Pokemon conceptually is a game where you have almost perfect information almost all the time because you have so much search and access to your deck. So I think that the players that are really, really good, they're able to process that really, really fast. And I don't think you need to process as fast as those players to be a good judge, but you need to understand the concepts and be on top of the metagame. Being on top of the metagame for these tournaments is very, very important because, once again, when you're walking down an aisle of tables and you see someone playing, I don't know, Trapagos, and they play their Noctowl and they go to search their deck and they don't have a Terapagos out. If you don't understand if you haven't read the cards, which is common for card players, if you haven't read the cards, like you can stop that right away, right? So it's just like stopping Nest Ball with Collapse Stadium. It's such a, like all of these things, understanding these kind of niche interactions is what's gonna allow you to actively judge on the level that we expect or that is expected of you.
Yeah, that makes sense. Like, for example, I don't expect a floor judge to be like an incredible player or whatever. I guess I was just kind of asking, like, do you think like the top level judges, do you think like obviously they have all those soft skills you're talking about, like they know the niche interactions. Do you think they also like are like good players, or like is it part of preparing for as being a judge is like you said, like you have to stay up to date on the meta, like you kind of like know those concepts. Like does Pokemon themselves, like through maybe like the Professor University, like are they trying to teach professors like, oh, this is what prize mapping is, or like these are some comeback mechanics, like familiarize yourself with these because that might come up in like some games that you judge, I guess.
So there has been, we've had metagame breakdowns before the event. We've had, sometimes this happens during professors meeting before the event. Sometimes it's something that's uploaded to the professor university. There's many different ways in which this happens. Sometimes it's just you talking with your assistant head judge right before the tournament. Hey guys, look out for this. Like, so it depends. There's no really a set format. It varies a bit. But that's something that is certainly on the minds of everyone, especially on the higher the level of the events gets.
Yeah, that makes sense. Like, yeah, like I'd expect, like, if you're judging worlds, like I'd expect you to have, like, be a different level, I guess, than if you're just judging regionals. So I'm sure that comes into account. So, yeah, because I just, like, just one example that pops in my head. Once I was playing a game once against Snorlax, and like I was just going draw pass every turn, and I played Iono, right? And then on my next turn, like I played a search card, and my opponent's like, "Okay, well you're stalling." I'm like, "Well, no, the order of the deck changed, and now I want to shuffle my deck because I don't want the cards. I want the cards at the bottom to like jump back to the top." It's like I feel like you have to be a pretty strong player, like even as a judge, to understand the interaction. Because you'd be like, "Why did the player all of a sudden go from like draw passing to like doing artisan or something to shuffle the deck?" So that was just an example I had. Like that's kind of why I was thinking about it. But yeah.
That makes sense, and I think that, for instance, understanding like that, especially with slow play and stalling, there are some guidelines on the book, but it's so hard. It's so. I think that's perhaps that's the hardest skill to understand. Is so my kid just walked in the back.
That's okay.
Oh, please, buddy.
That's all good. No, you're good.
Like
You're
a
good.
cameo.
Okay. So because it's all in the details, right? So I'm gonna paint a picture. Let's say a player takes 55 seconds for their first action in their turn, which is a nest ball, right? So you look at that, you'd be like, that's slow play because he is clearly taking more time than it was supposed to be, whatever he was supposed to be taking, right? But then after the nest ball, like I can stop him right there, and I can go, hey, I'm going to issue a slow play warning, and I would not be wrong as a judge, correct? Because
I think that's fair.
Right?
Yep.
Now, let's say I watch him for an extra 30 seconds, and he does 7 actions in a row based on that first nest ball, and he's just going super, super fast. If I had waited a little bit longer, I would see that perhaps that was not a slow play. That was him calculating all the things that he needed to do before he could proceed. Should it still be a slow play? Should it not be a slow play? I don't know. I'd have to watch it a little bit more and see if the pattern repeats itself, right? So it's all gray. There's very, very little black and white. There's a lot of gray when it comes down to judging.
Yeah, and like that's what I like. I think you need some area of judgment. You can't just follow things to a T. Because like I know the rulebook says like a general guideline is like 15 seconds per action, but what you just described to me, like that's actually playing the game faster than if he just took 15 seconds like 7 times, for example.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. So that's the breakdown, right? So what if you're doing every single action within the time frame, but when you compile all those actions, it looks like stalling.
Yeah.
You know, so there's so much that goes into it. It's to me that's the hardest one to master because it's all nuances. It's all nuanced. There's no clear like when you mass shuffle your deck 3 times and present it to your opponent, even if the top card changed, that deck is not sufficiently randomized. It's mathematically proven that is not random, right? I can always refer back to that. So, but with slow play and stalling, I think that's the distinction. And once again, the distinction between, I want to make a quick distinction because I think this distinction is so important. So, slow play as a category of infraction always means that there is no intent. You're playing slow because the game is complicated. Pokemon is a complicated game. And for whatever reason, the actions that you need to take now have taken longer than the game expects you to take to make them, right? Those decisions took a little bit longer than they should. So that's slow play. Stalling is doing that on purpose, which is completely different, right? So intent is a big differentiator, right? Playing the clock for your advantage, that's not slow play, that's stalling. And that's why it falls under a different category of infractions, and that is why the penalties are much, much harsher.
Yeah.
It's actually
So
really interesting we had this conversation because, like, when I think of the times I've seen stalling in my life, almost every time it's someone doing 10 actions of 15 seconds
yeah.
rather than one action of a minute because they know by the book, quote unquote, it's not punishable, right? And like, you're right. There's so much gray area in terms of like what do you call, and then suddenly like you call that on one guy and not the other guy, and then the other guy's mad. Like it's just you're almost making no one happy ever, right? And that's I suppose the life
The
of a
life of the
referee,
judge.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah,
100%. So
when you
so
think
the
about
best
sports,
thing
the
is
only time the refs do the best job when you don't notice them, right?
Yeah.
exactly that's it. If you did an amazing event, it means that no one remembers you.
Yeah,
That's what it means. That,
Yeah. That is
yeah,
true.
if you mess up once, you're done because you should have known better. You were wearing the judge shirt.
Yeah.
yeah.
So you said intent, right? So that's a really hard thing to do because I guess it's really hard to prove intent because like the only person who really knows their intentions is the person playing. So how do you kind
Correct.
of determine intent? So like is it stuff like for example, if someone's playing like they're playing Snorlax either against or they are playing Snorlax, does that maybe like go into consideration like a stall deck? Does if someone's up 1-0, like if there's like if someone's changing their pace like from how they played maybe in game 1 or earlier in the thing, are those kind of things that you guys consider when figuring out intent, or what other things might go into that?
100%. 100%. So change of the radical change in pace of play, something that we should always be considered. But I think the most important, so it's very hard for me personally to determine stalling by watching a single match, right? Uh, because usually players that either cheat or bend the rules or try to bend the rules in their way, it's almost like a compulsive pattern. They can't help themselves, right? So when you see people that get DQ'd for actively cheating, or you see people that get DQ'd or get harsher penalties because of stalling, you can almost always trace those behaviors to several points on any given tournament. And I'm not even talking, and with regionals, there's so many judges and so many people involved, but even at a local level, you can, like a player that stalls, you can see them stalling consistently if it comes to that scenario. It's part of their MO. So I think the safest way to go about this, because it's such a serious um, penalty associated with these infractions, that you will never be 100% sure, never, because like you said, the only person that can determine true intent is the person that's perpetrating whatever is happening, right? But you can always, through a series of observations or moments in time, you can determine that this player has a pattern of behavior that is consistent with stalling. And that's where I'm happy to apply the penalty to the set infraction.
So I know that you guys now, like if someone gets even like a warning, I think you guys log it, right? Like so I always see what the clipboard is and it goes in the system. So like let's say like I'm playing at a regional and like you're like okay like Ciaran might be slow playing. Like do you look up, be like in the log or whatever? Is there a way for judges to look up if like someone's gotten an infraction at like maybe I got an infraction like a previous tournament? Like can you guys do that? Is that something you guys do?
So penalties don't carry over from tournament to tournament. They do stay with you throughout the whole tournament. So like a warning usually will not escalate to bigger things unless, once again, it's a repeated pattern of behavior, right? So if you get a warning for slow play this match because it was a very very hard match, maybe a matchup where you're not really used to playing, and a judge happened to walk by and saw it and gave you a slow play warning. And the next match, you get a gameplay error warning for forgetting to set your prizes at the beginning of the game. That's not going to tell me that on your third warning for accidentally flipping over a card, oh, I'm going to DQ Ciaran because he's got 3 warnings. Clearly, he's cheating. That's not how it works, especially because when you have warnings in different penalty categories for different reasons, it really does not mean that you're doing these intentionally. It might mean that you're just a sloppy player, you know, which happens a lot. Like there's so many like if I can ask players to do one thing is communicate what you're doing and work on your mechanics, right? So if you communicate what you're doing and you work on your mechanics, the amount of penalties or the amount of infractions that you're gonna commit is gonna drop down considerably. It's just it's just the repetition of doing, right? Sometimes you guys, I see Pokemon players fidget a lot and they want to do things fast because I think they think it looks cool, but it's just it will make them make mistakes. Like you're gonna make mistakes because of those of trying to make these things fast, flipping your card, just making a big noise, and then you do the three cards, and then let's say you're gonna do an Ultra Ball, like one of the cards that you were going to discard with the Ultra Ball is a Professor's Research, and for whatever reason you put the Professor's Research on top, and then you went on and drew 7, and it was your second support of the turn, simply because you did not announce the Ultra Ball, took your time to say I'm discarding these 2 cards, right, and then proceeded as normal. So, but once again, I digress. Coming back to the warnings. So the warnings during a tournament, yes, we're always checking to see if there's a pattern of behavior in the warnings. Because if a same player gets 3 warnings for the same reason, that's what's the warning. That's exactly what the warnings are for. It's to let the player know that this is wrong. This is a rules infraction. You should not do it. Be more careful moving forward. And it happens again, and it happens again. And then that's when judges start talking. Listen, this happened, 4 times. Like, this does not seem like an ordinary problem. It seems like something, right? And I say 4 as an arbitrary number. It might be 2, it might be 5, depending on what the infraction is. But the important thing is that we need to have access to those so we can then have conversations towards what is it that we're going to do.
Okay, so the warnings, so they don't carry over tournament, but like, so you guys don't consider it at all. So like, if someone's always getting a warning for solo play, like let's say every regional, like if I ran new tournament, it doesn't matter. It kind of just resets. You're like, all right, like this is their first one for this.
Well, you don't have access. You don't have access because, for instance, if I'm not in San Antonio, I'm not going to be in San Antonio, so I don't have access to RK9, which is the tool that we use to input these penalties to take a look at those, right? So I don't have access to what has happened in the past, and I can only access what's happening during the tournament I'm present at.
Okay, so let me ask you like this.
And in a way, yeah.
I would say hypothetical. Like, do you think it would be better maybe for integrity if something like that carried over? Like maybe like for the whole season, you can just see someone's like history, and like maybe you guys can like decide like if someone's always having this happen in a tournament. You're like, okay, well, like the last 3 regionals, like you've gotten one for like slow play, for example. Like you shouldn't be getting them anymore.
Right. So I think it could be a double-edged sword in a way. It can be good in some scenarios, and it can be bad in some scenarios. Let's say in 3 months you played 3 regionals because they were all in your area, whatever it is. But once again, you're not a guy that plays all the time. You just like going to regionals, right? And then you're not really working on your mechanical skills, or maybe you just play live. And when you play live, you don't know how to shuffle. You don't learn how to shuffle. If you got 3 consecutive on 3 events, you got insufficient shuffling because live shuffle for you. Like, how can I assess that, right? So I think it also means that there's going to be a lot of investigations that used to take 1 minute, and they are now going to take 4 minutes or 5 minutes or 6. Because, like, let's say if I'm looking at your event history, that's like 15 regionals this season. You're going to all of them. You're going to this, you're going to that, right? So then again, I have to scour through your whole history as well. So I think that it has benefits and it has downsides. I'm okay with the way it is right now.
Okay, I think that's fair. So I kind of want to move on to like how you can like maybe protect yourself. So like jumping all the way back, kind of like to the scenario that kind of kickstarted this conversation. So how would you approach like you obviously don't have to comment on like this specific scenario, but like let's say I'm playing and my opponent did one thing, and now all of a sudden they're saying they didn't. So like saying your opponent is lying is like a very serious thing because your opponent is lying. That's like I think that is a DQable offense. Correct me if I'm wrong, but like so how do you kind of protect yourself? So if I say like my opponent said they attacked, I want the damage to say that they didn't take prizes. How do I make sure that like my opponent like locked in an attack and I can prove that even if a judge wasn't there to watch?
So I would say the first rule of any card game for you not to have a bunch of headaches while you're playing is communicate clearly what you're doing. And when you don't understand things, ask what is it that's being done. Make sure that everything is clear. And let's say I personally prefer when my opponent places the damage counters on my Pokemon, because that's an action they took that symbolizes that they attacked, right? If you're just that's a way I prefer to communicate very, very clearly those things. So once again, I'm going to give you the example of the Nest Ball, the Ultra Ball, the fictional example. Last 3 cards in my hands are Ultra Ball, Professor Research, and something else, right? But when I'm playing those cards, I always want to say Ultra Ball, discarding these 2. And if I'm doing Professor Research, it's very, very common for players just to lay the cards on the table and say nothing. If you're going to do that, at least point to the card that you're playing, right? So a knock, and I've seen players speaking the same language within the same city, that playing together all the time, that always have trouble because they don't communicate clearly. And I've seen players at internationals speaking 2 languages that are not English, trying to communicate with broken English, and do it beautifully because they're using hand signals and gestures, right? So I think the strongest way to protect yourself is to communicate clearly about things, and make sure you're announcing everything that you're doing, and ask your opponent to announce everything that you're doing. So what is it that you're doing? You're doing this. Okay, so this happens, right?
Mm-hmm.
Confirm. Okay, if this happens, okay, can I, is it my turn? Can I draw? Yes, you can draw. So, and then, because that way there's a way you can listen, I did this, I did that, I did this, I did that, and it becomes a lot more clear. Yeah. Especially when it comes to the attack phase, because it's the moment where the transition from my turn to your turn happens. Usually most of the communication errors happen right there, right? So that's when you want to be very, very clear and make sure your opponent is understanding what you're doing, and vice versa. So ask questions like, oh, if you're attacking, which attack are you using? I'm using this attack. Okay, can you place the damage counters? It helps me out with math. Okay, and so whatever it is, right? So make sure that, like, words are very important, but physical actions also tell a story, right? So if every single turn, let's say, let's give another example. When you pass a turn, you do this, and you've done this 10 times during a match. On the 11th time, you say that this is, I'm attacking. That's weird, right? So if I'm sitting at a table and I go like this, and I see the player do this, and then when they attack, they tap their Pokemon, I can see that there's a clear gesture that's differentiating these 2 things, right?
Okay.
Yeah.
So yeah.
So okay, I guess
but there will never be a way to be 100%. The only thing you can do is minimize the chances of miscommunication, right? That's the only thing you can do, and that's all that's in control under your belt as a player. Like you can try to control the miscommunication. That's all you can do, and that's the best you can do. And sometimes, even with that, situations will arise, and they will be frustrating, and that's part of dealing with humans. And
Okay. Because I guess my kind of take on that is, I agree with everything you said. But if you take what Benji said at face value, for example, like he did ask his opponent multiple times, "Are you attacking?" And his opponent confirmed multiple times. So like that's good communication. And he's saying his opponent like lied once the judges came over. So I guess like if he followed kind of what you're saying, and then he still couldn't really protect himself. Like the only way, like you said, to really protect himself from having this happen would have been just to, like, let his opponent take the prizes, and then being like, okay, well, you obviously meant to attack because you took your prizes. But now all of a sudden, then that gets escalated to like a double prize penalty, and then Benji is like kind of violating the. Like, I forget. I don't know what the exact rule is. I don't know if it's the spirit of the game or something. It's like because it's both players' responsibility to kind of like make sure there's no gameplay errors going over. I guess that's kind of like where I'm kind of at. Like I get what you're saying. Like I think the answer is like if you're playing honestly, there is no really real way to prevent this. So I guess that's kind of why I was also asking earlier is like, do you guys keep track tournament to tournament? Because maybe if an opponent like multiple times is having situations where like something like this comes up, like maybe that's something you can like track. So that's kind of just why I was curious. So
no, I get it. And once again, I can't comment on this scenario because I wasn't there. I only have the perspective of one player. and whatever the rules the judges decided on that specific event,
Mhm.
it's what their investigation led to rule. And I trust my fellow professors on their rulings, so I can't comment on those rulings. What you can't what you can't do is let your opponent make a mistake on purpose and then call a judge.
Mhm.
Like I said, it's both players' responsibility to maintain the game state. So if you let your opponent, and once again, I'm not going to use this scenario, I'm going to use a different scenario. If, let's say, you have a Path to the Peak into play, and you let your opponent use a Radiant Greninja and draw a couple of cards and then you call a judge, what you did was letting your opponent break a rule intentionally for you to gain an advantage. And there is intent into there, right? So that falls straight into cheating. That's no longer a gameplay error. When you let your opponent make a mistake and call the judge to, when you really in full let your opponent make a mistake, and sometimes it's too fast, right? It was like the guy goes, once again, not communicating. He just discards an energy, draws a card, and then taps his Greninja.
Yeah.
Like you had no time to respond, right?
Yeah.
That happens. Oh my God, that happens so much, right? Once again, why? Because the player was not communicating what he was doing. So he didn't even give you the opportunity to, let's say,
Yeah.
catch the mistake, right? But if you're willingly allowing your opponent to make game-breaking mistakes, that's a big no-no because it's intentional, right? And when it's intentional, you're breaking the rules to gain an advantage, and that would fall under the category of cheating. And
Yeah.
that cheating, there's no escalation or de-escalation. Cheating is DQ.
Yep.
The penalty associated with the infraction is DQ, and that's it.
And there's such a fine
Right?
line between like communicating openly and like obviously you can't be 100% too correct ever. Like there's no such thing. Like it's always good to announce what you're doing all the time. But there's such a fine line between being that guy who's saying, I will Radiant Greninja, discard my energy, and I will draw 2 cards, and enunciating like too much stuff,
Yeah.
and being someone who communicates clearly. So there's like a real fine line with that, where I think there's certain things that are more important, like you touched on, to communicate clearly. So for example, one of my biggest pet peeves is when someone just says attack. What do you mean attack? Like, dude, just say the attack name, man. Like it's not that hard. And I'm not saying I'm gonna cross fusion strike Technoblast. Like you can just say Technoblast or just say like Phantom Dive or whatever. If you're playing
Yeah.
Charizard, you say Burning Darkness. Like I don't like the whole like attack thing because obviously most of the time Pokemon only have one attack. It's very clear what attack you're going to use, but there's that odd time where when you build that habit, you're going to say attack with a Dragapult active, and then your opponent's going to say, "Okay, you Jet Headbutt." And you're going to say, "The hell." So I think it's
Yeah.
important to like do both, right? Like you gotta go both ways. Don't enunciate too much, but like be clear. And like most of us, thankfully, have never had this issue in our Pokemon careers because people around us communicate clearly. We communicate clearly, whatever. But I'm sure as a judge, when you're seeing 3,000 people play in a tournament, you're bound to have one or two that are just kind of not up to par on that. So I think it's a good habit to build.
100%. 100%.
Yeah.
I think that announcing, like I come from Magic. That's a game I played my whole life. So I just say attack. To me, it's very hard to break that habit because I've been announcing attack for 20 years.
Yeah.
But yeah, so now when I teach my son how to play, I was like, "You're attacking? How? What are you doing? Are you discarding energy? Are you not discarding energy? What is it?" And like, okay, let me do the math, and then he says the name, and then but it's baby steps, right? And I like the more clear you are, the better it is. Once again, if you communicate very clearly, which if you communicate, let's say, no, I did cross fusion. If you did a Technoblast, right? Technoblast. Okay, let me place the damage and that's it. You did Technoblast, correct? Great, awesome.
Nice.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think I have to go in like a couple of minutes, Raph. So thanks so much for coming here. But before we end, I just want one more question. Would you like judges to be able to comment on rulings? I personally think it would be great if every time there was like a serious ruling, like Pokemon like either like said it like in a website somewhere, or like judges could like directly comment, so we had more stories or like more perspectives. So how would you feel if judges were allowed, or do you wish judges were allowed to kind of comment on like what's going on with some of these like more high profile rulings?
Once again, I think that there's a lot that goes into this. I don't think, with the way the world is right now, that it would be good to have professors commenting on other professors' rulings. I think that's just gonna open up a gigantic
I
can
meant
of
people
worms.
involved in it. Like, let's say you made a ruling, or I think especially if someone gets like disqualified, like the person involved can like say what happened, they think happened, or why
I
they did
would I
something.
would not I would not want that. No, I would not want that. Other companies have, for instance, when disqualifications are involved, other companies, for instance, have um, lay down comments, but that comes from the company,
Mhm.
not the judges. I don't think the judge. That's not my job. That's not what
Yeah.
I should do. I feel like the judges, if anything, the judges protect the integrity of the event. The company protects the integrity of the judges. That's kind of the hierarchy in which it should work. Right now, Pokemon, the way they chosen to protect our integrity is not to comment, to not escalate issues. It, especially the way things are right now, where everything is super black and white, and people are extremely opinionated, and everyone has their, the hill they die on. People would not, the dialogues on a situation like this would never be progressing the issue forward. They just become hateful with time. So
Yeah.
I
It's like
do think that with the moment that we're living right now and the reality of the world, it's actually for the best that these things are not discussed in public forum. Like, if something happens, what rulings and mistakes and whatever happens in an event usually fuels change and improvement into the next event. Now that's great, right? That's great. That's what you want to see. Something was awful in the first event of the year. Let's change it for the second event. Or a ruling was made consistently or at the second event of the year. So let's change that the way that was, because rulings also can change from event to event, right? You can perceive, and Will recently gave a really good example, which is the second illegal search on a turn when a first illegal search has already been done on this turn. You gain no additional information, right? If you do it right away, let's say you do, his example was an Ultra Ball and then a Nest Ball. In the Nest Ball, you couldn't play because you already had 5 Pokemon. That's a great example, right? So that was a change that was implemented with time. And I think that's the best way to go right now.
Yeah, that makes sense. I
Perfect
guess
way to look at
protecting
it
people,
is
yeah.
like when you know, in like the NBA, you watch the NBA or the NFL, and like James Harden flops for like the 50th time of the season. Then Adam Silver the next day is like, "Hey guys, sorry, our refs missed the call," and everyone is more pissed than they would have been had they just let it be.
Yeah.
That's kind of what I look at this with. Like, you bring more attention to it, right?
Yeah, you gotta let it die, because I'm
Just let it
sure that
happen.
in a couple of weeks, the Twitterverse is gonna be chiming in on something completely different and unrelated. And yeah, I don't think it would be healthy for the online community to have professors comment on other professors' rulings, or even myself. Because the moment that I comment on a ruling, even if I was the one that made it, I expose myself, and now I need to be able to take all that backlash. And quite honestly, I can't.
Yeah.
I,
No,
I
that's a
can't,
good
because
point.
it's too much. Everyone can say whatever they want from anywhere, being untouched, and I don't think it would be a great way to move forward with.
Yeah, that's a really fair point. So yeah, Raph, thanks so much for coming on and talking with us. I think this was like a really good discussion. I think like pulling the curtain back, I think really good dialogue. I think a lot of questions I had got answered. So if you want to plug your socials, go ahead. Or anything you want to plug, go for it.
No social. I'm a boomer, man.
You're a
I'm too
boomer?
old for that. But but I appreciate. Thank you. I think that it's great that we get to talk about these things, because once again, it's called the Professor Program, and a big part of being a professor is educating people and making sure they're moving forward. So I think that being able to talk about the things that we are able to talk about is a great way to do that. And you guys have a great audience, and you're always chill, and I think that I appreciate the opportunity.
Awesome. I'm glad to give
For
it to you.
sure.
So
Yeah.
cool. Awesome.
All right, Kieran's got to go. He's getting antsy. I'd be antsy too if I had to go, and it was 4 minutes past my time. So we will let him go. Thank you all for being here. We will see you next week, and thanks, Raph, once again for coming on. We appreciate you. All right, y'all. We'll see you next week.